The train hissed like something wounded as it rolled to a stop, coughing steam into the dry New Mexico sky. Dust Haven Station was nothing more than a single wood slat platform, a freight shed, and a sign that had lost half its paint to the sun. Clara Halston stepped down with her carpetbag in hand, and her throat thick with dust. July wind clawed at the hem of her travel dress, lifting the tan grit like smoke. There was no one waiting, not a man with cavalry boots, not a soul with a brooch pinned like the one he had described. Just a station boy, swinging a broom too large for his frame, and the station agent who looked at Clara the way folks looked at stray dogs, half pity, half annoyance. She stood there 26 years old, spine straight as rail iron, and stomach empty since dawn. The only sounds were the creak of sun-baked boards beneath her boots and the sigh of wind off the desert. She sat down slowly on a bench, faded to gray, her back stiff, her hands still gloved, though her fingers burned beneath the cotton. The carpetbag at her feet held everything she owned. The letter in her pocket held everything she'd hoped for. "Meet me in Dust Haven," Jediah Boone had written. "By the windmill at the station. I'll be wearing the cavalry brooch, you'll know it when you see it." But there was no windmill, no brooch, no Jediah. Only heat and silence. Clara reached into her pocket and smoothed the creases in the letter for the third time. She knew every word, had read it by candlelight, after her shift at the school, hiding it beneath the lining of her wash dress so her aunt wouldn't find it. Maureen Halston didn't believe in letters, or hope, or dreams not made of coin and compliance. "You think the world owes you softness?" Clara, her aunt, once snapped. "You think the West'll be kinder than me? That man'll want you once he sees the lines on your hands." But it wasn't kindness Clara had sought. Not love either, not in the way novels painted it. She wanted space, a stretch of sky that didn't end with rooftops. She wanted a man who didn't see her as a burden or a bargain. Jediah's letters hadn't promised romance. They promised partnership. "I seek a woman not afraid of wind or dirt or silence. I've got a patch of land and calloused hands. If you've got a mind to build something honest, come west." So she came. She sold her mother's locket for a train fare, left behind a teaching post no one respected, and a boarding room with mildew in the corners. No one waved her off. No one waited when she arrived. She blinked hard against the glare. Her corset pinched at her ribs, and the back of her neck itched beneath her pinned braid. But she didn't rise, didn't ask. If she stood, it would mean he wasn't coming. If she sat, there was still a chance. The station agent came out, wiping his hands on a rag, squinting at her. "Ma'am," he called, voice wary, "you waiting on someone?" Clara nodded once small. "Yes, sir, my fiancé." The man's mouth tugged sideways. "Ain't no more trains till Wednesday." "I'll wait," she said, though her voice barely reached him. He hesitated, then went back inside. She stayed. Minutes passed, then an hour, then two. The platform emptied, and the sun slouched westward. Clara counted her coins, less than $3. Enough for a room one night, and maybe a plate of beans. After that it would be charity, or shame. Her stomach ached with more than hunger. She stared at the horizon so long, her eyes watered, then she heard it hoofbeats slow and sure on packed dirt. A man appeared at the edge of the platform, leading a gray gelding dusted from the trail. He was tall, lean-shouldered, dressed in worn canvas, and a hat dark with sweat at the brim. His boots were plain, his eyes not. He stopped a few paces off, removed his hat. "Miss Halston?" he asked, a voice like gravel and pine smoke. She rose, uncertain. "Yes, I'm Nash Boone, Jediah's brother." Clara froze. He stepped forward, careful. "He ain't hurt, just, he's not well. Sent me in his place. Asked me to meet you, explained." She stared at the space beside him. "Empty? Why didn't he come?" Nash's jaw worked. "He thought you'd be better off knowing, instead of waiting." Silence stretched taut. She drew a breath, sharp but steady. "I have nowhere to stay. There's a boarding house up the road. I can take you there. I don't take charity." "Call it a debt," he said evenly, "for wasting your time." Clara studied him. His shirt clung damp at the collar. His eyes, though tired, held no pity. just a kind of worn steadiness. At last she nodded. He led her down the road, not speaking. His horse followed behind like a shadow. Dusthaven blinked beneath the sun, a scatter of wood buildings and low voices. Chickens pecked at dry ground. A curtain fluttered in a second-story window. Life here moved slow, like smoke rising from cold fire. The boarding house was clean, though crooked. The landlady offered a small room, with a slanted ceiling, and a basin chipped at the lip. Nash paid 3 nights in advance, then placed his hat back on his head. "If you need anything," he said, "I'll be out by the creek. Got a fence to finish." She nodded. He left. Clara stood at the window long after the door clicked shut. Outside, Nash mounted and rode off into the dusk. She didn't know him, but there was something in the way he walked, a kind of tired patience that settled in her chest. She sat on the bed and let her bag fall to the floor. Her hands, so still on the train, now trembled. She didn't cry. There was no one to hear it, and she wasn't sure what she'd be crying for. Instead, she lay back, arms crossed beneath her head. The ceiling sloped like a shoulder, hunched against wind. The air smelled of lavender soap and wood oil. She whispered to the dark. This wasn't the plan. Then closed her eyes. But somewhere deep beneath her ribs, something small and still held on, not to the man she was promised, but to the place he brought her. And to the man who stayed when the promise broke. Morning came to Dusthaven without knocking. Sunlight slipped through the dusty glass, gleaming on the rim of the wash basin, like a blade against sleep. Clara opened her eyes slowly, her body sore, as if she'd walked 30 miles. The coarse blanket smelled faintly of old wood, and her hands were numb from the chill. Downstairs, pots clinked in soft rhythm. The faint bitterness of coffee curled through the air like smoke. She washed her face. In the cold basin, changed into the plainest dress she owned, dark brown cotton square collar, modest lines. She didn't know what she wanted, didn't know where to go. But she went down anyway, like someone who had long learned to keep moving even without a destination. The dining room was small, just 3 tables. An old couple sat in the far corner, eating without looking up. The innkeeper, a gray-bunned woman with eyes like slate, set a plate of cornbread and bacon before Clara without a word. That more than anything made her feel seen, in a way that pinched behind her ribs. She ate slowly, every bite folding into the quiet knot that had taken root inside her. Then the door creaked open. Nash Boone stepped in, same canvas shirt as yesterday, but cleaner now, damp around the collar. He set his hat on the table, and his eyes paused when they found her. Not surprised, not uncertain, just a small nod. "I hoped you'd still be here," he said, voice low and without decoration. "I have nowhere else," she replied. He didn't sit until she gave a nod. Then he pulled the chair out carefully and leaned in, elbows on the table. Respectful, in his stillness. "I was planning to ride out to the homestead this afternoon," he said. "Bring back some supplies, fix a space up if town feels too close for comfort." She looked at him. "I was promised a place there." "And you'll have it," he said. "Not in the way you expected, but in the way that still counts." Her mouth pressed into a line. "I'm not a dead ode." "You're not," he said. "You're a person left in the worst way. I don't mean to replace anyone. I just figure a broken promise deserves a cleaner end." They sat in silence, not angry, not trusting yet, but present in a way that mattered. She stood. "I'll come with you. I can ride." His brow lifted. "It's a rough trail." "I didn't come here for velvet saddles," she said, "and I won't be left behind again." He stood slowly, studying her for a breath, before nodding. "All right." They left before the sun reached its peak. Nash borrowed a second horse from the livery, adjusted the stirrups to her leg, without comment, then handed her the reins with a nod. She mounted without help. The trail west was a ribbon of dust and stone. The land wasn't soft here, not like the fields back east. It was dry and hot, and quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed into your bones. But it had wind, and the scent of pine far off, and that stillness only found in places where people had to be honest, just to survive. Clara didn't ask questions. Nash didn't fill the silence. They rode like 2 shadows, cast on a land that had no use for explanations. By midday, They reached a narrow stream. Clara dismounted without aid, knelt by the water, and splashed her face. Her eyes closed, breath slow, like someone who'd carried dust in her lungs too long. Nash stood back, hands resting on the saddle. "You served in the war?" she asked, not turning. "I did. Cavalry, Missouri Regiment." She stood slowly, drying her hands on her skirt. "You came back whole." He looked at her, then down. Not entirely. They didn't speak of it again. The sun climbed. They rode on. By late afternoon, the land changed. Fewer cottonwoods, more sage and low brush. Then the fence line appeared, weathered posts, leaning with wind-worn stubbornness. And finally the house. 2 rooms, tin roof smoke, curling thin from a crooked chimney. Clara dismounted stiffly. Nash led the horses to the trough, then returned to the door. "I'll let you go in first," he said. She nodded and stepped inside. The room smelled of old ash and dry pine, a cold stove in the corner, a single table, 1 chair, a narrow bed, a trunk at the foot. No curtains, but soft light spilled in through the window like honey. She stood for a long moment, eyes tracing the bare beams. Then she turned back to the doorway. "It's plain," she said. "It's solid," he replied. She looked toward the hills, wind lifting her braid. "I can work. I can keep hens, sew, take care of things. I'm not afraid of dirt." "I didn't think you were," Nash said. She turned to him fully. "Then why help me? I'm not your responsibility." He didn't look away. "Because when I saw you sitting there looking torn and stitched up wrong, I knew I couldn't ride past it." Her eyes narrowed. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing you don't want to give." She folded her arms, not in defiance, just to steady herself. "I'll need time." "You have it," he said. The wind kicked up, smelling of far-off rain. Nash stepped back. "I'll sleep in a barn," he added, "until you decide what comes next." She nodded once. "I'd like some coffee, if there's any left." He smiled, faint, honest. "I'll start the fire." They walked back toward the house together, side by side. Neither reached for the door first, but when he opened it, she stepped inside ahead of him. Clara didn't fall asleep that first night. Though her body was spent, she lay still in the small room, listening to the insects blend with the wind, threading through the chinks in the wall. The house smelled of smoke-aged timber, faintly sweet, but unfamiliar. The heavy blanket itched against her skin. Somewhere outside, an owl called once, echoing off a distant rise, and she clenched her nightdress without meaning to. It wasn't fear, it was unfamiliarity. And buried deep inside, that unfamiliarity was a hollow loneliness, colder than bone. The next morning, Clara woke, with her throat dry and her knees aching from the hard air. When she opened the door, the sun was already high. Squinting against the light, she saw it there just outside: a ceramic water jug, a steaming tin of coffee, and a piece of cornbread wrapped in cloth. No note, no footprints near the door. Only the quiet presence of someone who knew how to stay just far enough back. She ate in silence. The coffee was bitter and a little scorched but hot. The bread was dry but warm in her hands. Sometimes the smallest warmth cuts the deepest. Later, as she cleaned the cup, she noticed a fresh stack of firewood by the stove, neatly arranged, unmarked by dust. He had brought it in while she slept. He didn't ask questions, didn't hover. But he had not missed a single thing. She began to notice more coffee waiting each morning, sometimes with a slice of dried apple on the side. A handkerchief folded and set atop the latch, for the dust, she guessed. Once, when the air turned colder than expected, she found a second blanket folded neatly at the foot of her bed. She didn't ask, didn't thank him, but something unfamiliar stirred. Not fear, not obligation, something quieter, maybe even trust. 3 days passed. On Wednesday afternoon, Clara felt herself burning, her throat scratched with every breath, her forehead warm, with an ache that pulsed behind her eyes. She stayed in bed, curled beneath the blanket, her breath shallow and uneven. Near dusk, the door eased open. No knock, no voice, just a bowl of warm water set gently on the floor, and a scrap of paper torn from a ledger. "If you need anything, call. I'll be just outside. N." She stared at the writing, firm, slightly slanted without flourish. She didn't call. Didn't have to. Just knowing someone was there, not barging in but standing near, was enough to let her breathe easier. When the fever broke, Clara stepped out onto the porch. The wind had lost its edge, the air now cool and still. On the wooden bench lay a ball of leftover yarn, a sewing needle, and a torn sleeve from an old coat. She smiled just barely, a curve of the mouth like a whisper between seasons. This wasn't the place she had hoped for, but clearly it was not the place she'd been left behind. The rhythm of days fell into place, like dust settling on a windowsill. Quiet, undisturbed. Clara began to work, not from duty but instinct. Movement gave her something the stillness couldn't definition. She swept the floors, polished the washstand, with lavender oil from the bottom of her valise. She mended shirts in the early light, and washed them in the trough by noon, then strung them tight, along a wire line Nash had strung, without comment. He never praised, never interrupted. But the next morning she found a bundle of thread bone buttons and a tin of salve placed on the bench outside her door. Tucked beneath it was a square of calico, bright blue. Something salvageable from an old dress, she guessed. She ran her finger across the rim of the tin. No note. But it was a kind of language, wasn't it? The kind where noticing meant more than words. A week passed like wind over prairie, unmarked, but shaping everything. One morning a storm rolled in from the north, kicking up red earth and howling against the porch eaves. Nash spotted it first, eyes narrowing at the shifting line of clouds. "Back fence'll take the worst of it," he said. She met his gaze. "Then let's go." He didn't hesitate, just handed her gloves, thick and worn soft. She slipped them on, and he paused, looking at her hands, saw the red scrape near her thumb, where she'd caught a needle. His fingers brushed hers, lightly adjusting the fit. "These'll hold," he murmured, then turned toward the barn. Outside, the wind stung like needles. Together they wrestled the blown rails into place, Nash lifting the weight, while Clara steadied the posts. Dust clung to her braid, sweat salted her brow. The sky threatened but never broke, the kind of storm that roared only to remind you it could. When the last nail sank, she leaned on the hammer, breath shallow. Nash stood beside her, his shoulders dusted in rust-red grit, one hand pressed to the small of his back, like it ached. His hat had blown off, and he didn't bother chasing it. She watched the way he looked at the land, not as something owed or even conquered, but simply endured. "Your mother," she said over the wind, "was she from here?" He didn't turn, just nodded toward the ridgeline. "Sonora, south of the border. She passed when I was 6. Silence. Then quieter. She braided my hair before school. I still remember how her hands smelled, like rosemary and smoke." Clara's throat tightened. "And your father didn't claim her?" "Not really. Claimed me even less." She looked down. "But the land Jed inherited. I stayed, dug the well deeper, fixed what didn't hold. Not mine by law, but it didn't stop me." She nodded, unsure why her chest felt heavier now. They finished without speaking. But as they walked back to the house, Nash offered his sleeve, when she wiped grit from her face. She didn't take it, but she saw the gesture. Small, incomplete, but real. It was the day after the storm that she found the letter. She had opened the trunk by the hearth, looking for a clean shirt to mend. Nash had said she could take what she needed. Beneath the folded flannel tied with leather cord was a bundle of papers, old receipts, ledger notes. At the very bottom, a folded page with her name in the corner. Ink faded, the edge torn. She didn't mean to read it, but her name was there. She opened it with careful fingers. "If I don't come back, it's because I chose not to. I never meant harm, but I don't belong in the world she imagines. Tell her I wasn't the man she deserved." Clara stood still for a long moment, the letter crinkling in her hand as her fingers curled tight. It wasn't heartbreak she felt. It was the quiet collapse of something she'd been building in her own mind, brick by imagined brick. She stepped outside, found Nash splitting kindling beside the shed. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, revealing forearms browned by sun and work. When he saw the paper, his shoulders tensed. "You knew," she said, not angry, just stripped. "I did." She held it up like proof. You let me believe he might still come. I let you breathe, he said, his voice steady. Let you walk in your own time. He left that letter for me, told me not to go after him. Clara's jaw clenched. He ran. Yes. She studied Nash's face. There was no defensiveness there, just weariness. And something older than that, sorrow perhaps, but not shame. He said I deserved better, she said softly. But he didn't even stay to say it himself. Nash looked down at the axe. Jed always wanted to be better than he was. He just didn't know how to keep standing when it got hard. Clara folded the letter once, then again. And you, what did you promise him? His eyes met hers square and unwavering, that I wouldn't take what wasn't mine. The space between them tightened. Not in distance, but in weight. It was the first time she wondered truly what Nash had felt when he saw her step off that train. You didn't take anything, she said. You just stayed. His voice was low. Sometimes that's harder. That evening the wind had settled, and the sky was pale gold. She came in from gathering kindling, and found the coffee pot scrubbed clean, warming on the stove. Next to it, a small glass jar of honey, the kind not found out here unless someone rode miles into town. No note, no mention of it. Just the soft tap of footsteps outside, as Nash repaired the bent hinge on the front door. She watched through the window as he knelt, hammer quiet, movements precise. He didn't know she was watching. That mattered. She brewed the coffee herself, poured 2 tin cups, and took them out. He accepted his without comment, sipped once, then looked toward the hills. I never wrote you letters, he said, never made promises. I know. He nodded almost to himself, then said nothing more, and for the first time Clara didn't feel like she was waiting for anything. The storm clouds had held off for days, but the air told a different story. The kind of heaviness that clung to your skin and made wooden doors swell in their frames. Clara was in the chicken run sleeves, rolled, brushing out the nesting boxes. One hen had gone broody, feathers puffed and eyes daring. Nash stood just outside the gate, holding a length of wire and a bucket of feed. You'll lose a finger to that one, he said flatly. She already tried, Clara replied, smirking. I won. She looked up, and Nash didn't move. His eyes lingered a breath longer than they should have. Something caught in the air between them, not quite a pause, not quite a pull. Then he passed her the feed without a word, and went back to mending the broken latch on the barn door. Later that afternoon the wind rose sharp. A hinge squealed. Rain wasn't far. Nash tapped the porch post as he passed her. Storm's coming. Help me brace the west shed. They worked side by side, hammering crossbeams and securing shutters. Nash didn't speak unless he had to, but his hands were steady. He handed her tools before she asked, tightened the last nail when her grip faltered. She caught him glancing once, just once, when her braid fell loose in the wind. He didn't look away quickly, and he didn't smile, but he saw her. That night the first drops fell. It came soft at first, like fingers tapping the roof, then heavy, soaking through the earth. Clara lit the lamp, the glass fogging warm. Nash stood by the stove, brushing water from his sleeves. His hair clung to his forehead. Clara brought him a towel without saying anything. He took it, his eyes flicking up to hers, for a second longer than necessary. Then he nodded, small but real. They ate in near silence, the fire crackling low. Clara had warmed leftover beans with cornbread. Nash didn't speak much while he chewed, but when she reached for the salt, he passed it before she touched it. She noticed. She didn't speak of Jediah that night. Didn't think of Kansas City, or the depot, or the letter folded at the bottom of her trunk. Instead, she watched how Nash dried his boots near the hearth, how he checked the door lock twice, how he refilled her coffee without asking. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer heavy. It was something else, watchful, alive. 2 mornings later Clara laughed, a real laugh, round and sudden, while trying to pull a root out of the vegetable patch. Nash had just told her how a raccoon once outsmarted him 3 nights straight, stealing every egg without so much as a feather left behind. I set traps. He muttered he left them shut, like he was mocking me. She threw back her head and laughed. Not polite, not guarded. The kind of laugh that took her by surprise. The kind that made her eyes wrinkle and her breath catch. Nash turned his head slightly, the hammer in his hand, paused mid-air. He looked at her, not startled, just still. Then he went back to hammering, but slower. That night when he poured her coffee, his hands were steadier than usual. When she spoke, he listened without the same distance. And when she didn't speak, he let the quiet settle gently between them. The letter arrived on the 4th day of rain. Clara found it tucked under the tin milk can at the door. The envelope was worn, edges damp. She stared at her name a long time before bringing it inside. Nash had just come in from checking the fence line. His coat dripped by the hearth. When he saw the letter in her hand, his posture shifted subtle. He didn't ask. He didn't reach for it. Just stood near the window, his hand resting on the sill, watching the trees bend under the weight of the storm. Clara sat down the letter in her lap. Her fingers moved slow along the edge. She didn't open it right away. Nash didn't speak. She broke the seal carefully. Read it once. Then again. The words were short, rushed. I'm headed back. I need to explain. I'll be in Dusthaven by week's end. Jed. The room felt colder than it was. The fire hadn't gone out, but Clara pulled her shawl tighter. She folded the letter. Her hand stayed on it longer than needed. Nash didn't ask what it said, but he didn't leave either. Just stood there, boots still wet, jaw set. She didn't look up. Not right away. When she finally did, she met his eyes. There was no blame in them, no anger. Just stillness. Something quiet and restrained, like a man watching smoke curl from a house he didn't build but had kept from falling. Clara stood slowly, the letter still in her hand. She walked past him to the cupboard, pulled 2 cups from the shelf, poured coffee. One for him, one for her. Then she sat back down, stirred hers without drinking. He took the cup, held it, didn't sip. Outside the storm swelled again, thunder low and rolling. She looked down at the table. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. He didn't answer. I thought I'd be angry, she continued. But it's like the pages of a book I already finished. And I don't want to go back. Still no words from him. But his cup touched the table quietly. Then his hand, rough calloused, rested palm down between them. Not reaching, not assuming. Just there. Clara didn't touch it. But she didn't move away. And for now, that was enough. The sun barely pushed through the haze that morning. It was one of those days when the air felt full, before the sky ever opened, like something was waiting to be spoken or broken. Clara stood at the doorway, arms folded, watching the path that led from town. She had not said much since the letter came. Nash had woken early as always. He moved around the house like a man used to silence, tending the stove, checking the saddle girth, hauling water. But he paused more than once near the window, glancing toward her with something unreadable in his eyes. Mid-morning came with a wind shift. The stillness cracked. Clara spotted the figure first, a rider slow hunched. Dust followed in a ribbon behind him. The horse was gray and tired, and the man, she knew him before she could name him. Jediah. Nash saw him too. He didn't speak, just stepped out quietly, wiping his hands on a cloth, and set it on the porch rail. Clara's heart didn't race. It didn't freeze. It simply settled into something low and strange, like watching a fire that had long since gone cold. Jed dismounted stiffly. His coat hung loose, too big, on his thinner frame. His hair, once thick and sand-colored, was cropped short, peppered with gray. Eyes shadowed by years he hadn't written about. He stopped at the gate, hands gripping the wood. He looked at her like a man who knew he'd come too late. Clara, he said, voice dry as gravel. She walked down the steps, boots solid on wood, stopped just a few feet from him. I came as fast as I could, Jed said, swallowing hard. After I wrote. She nodded once, not cold, not warm, just still. I didn't think you would, she replied. Jed shifted. I didn't know if I could face you. That's why I didn't come before. Nash stood off to the side near the barn. He didn't move toward them, didn't look away. His shadow stretched long, on the ground behind him. I was broken when I left, Jed continued. After the war. You remember how I was. When we wrote, I tried to sound whole, sound strong. But I wasn't. And the closer it got to you arriving, the more I panicked. I thought if I brought you into that mess, I'd ruin you." He looked away. "So I ran. I told myself it was mercy." Clara breathed in slow. The wind stirred her hair across her cheek. "You didn't write," she said. "No," Jed replied. "I was ashamed. I thought you'd forget me, that someone else would come along. Maybe someone better." He glanced at Nash now. Just a flicker. Nash didn't flinch. He bent to pick up a coil of rope, slowly, like it wasn't meant to be noticed. Clara looked at Jed for a long moment. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "I did forget, not all at once, but little by little. And then I remembered differently, not the man I wrote to, but the silence you left behind." Jed opened his mouth, then closed it. "I didn't come here for a rescue," she said. "I came for a promise. And you weren't there. But someone else was, someone who didn't say much but never left, not once." Jed's shoulders sagged. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I just needed you to know I never stopped thinking about you." Clara stepped back. "Not far. Just enough. I do forgive you," she said, her gaze unwavering. "But I'm not the girl from the letter anymore." She looked toward Nash then. He was tying the rope to a rail, quiet, precise. But his hands had stilled. When he looked up, their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't move. Jed followed her gaze. And this time he understood. "She stayed because of you," he said softly. Nash didn't answer. Jed turned back to Clara. "You look like you belong here." Clara smiled just barely. "I do." Jed stood for another minute, as if waiting for something else to fall into place. Then he reached for the reins, mounted slowly, and with the tip of his hat, to no one in particular, rode back the way he'd come, his shadow trailing behind him, like a story unfinished. That evening Clara found Nash by the woodpile. He had stripped down to his undershirt, sweat clinging to his neck, his hands thick with bark dust. He didn't look up when she approached. "I thought you might go," she said quietly. He kept stacking wood. Didn't seem right to stay after that. She nodded slowly, then crouched beside him, picked up a log, passed it to his hand. "You stayed when no one else did," she said. "That counts more than words." He finally looked at her. The porch light behind her caught the gold in her eyes. The wind brushed past. "I came here for a promise," she said, voice soft as dusk. "I stayed because of you." Nash didn't speak, but his hands stopped moving, and after a beat he set the last log down, gently. Then he reached for her wrist, not tight, not pulling, just a touch. They stood together as the night settled around them. Not lovers yet, not just neighbors. Something in between, and growing stronger with every silence they shared. A year had passed since Jed's ride into the past, and Dusthaven had a gentler rhythm now. The fence stayed straight, the hens laid steadily, and every corner of the homestead carried the evidence of care. Clara and Nash did not marry in white gowns, or with bells in town. But in the quiet cadence of their days, every action was a vow. Dawn arrived gently, pale gold, spilling over the hills. Nash slipped out of bed before Clara touched morning light, his old boots already soft, his shirt sleeves folded just so. He fetched water from the well, the wooden bucket swinging steady in his calloused hands. With hushed precision, he filled the kettle on the stove before arriving back, just as Clara untied the bonnet she wore, to walk across fields. They shared coffee by the window each morning, Clara pouring, while he leaned on his elbow, watching her like the anchor to his life. He never spoke first. Not much changed except the warmth in his eyes. When Clara left to teach, Nash walked her to the gate, with the same polite distance of the day she arrived. A small nod reach to secure his hat, and then back to his chores. Clara taught the children of the frontier schoolhouse, born of settlers and ranch hands, wary yet bright. Each afternoon she returned with books under her arm and chalk dust in her hair. Nash was always there that night, sleeves rolled, smoothing her hair with one hand and wiping chalk from her dress with the other. Both laughed when she sneezed in dusted chalk, and each time Nash's fingers lingered, just a moment in her hair. Spring brought strong windstorms, and Nash set out to build a new room next to the house. It wasn't for show. It was necessity. Clara came out with a measuring tape, her skirt gathered for work. Nash handed her a pencil and the freshly cut roof beam. They worked side by side, measuring, marking, drilling, lifting. When foundation stones settled, Nash paused. With no grand gesture, he tapped the beam with a hammer, then laid the first board himself as Clara watched paint spatters on her cheeks. She touched his arm, pointing out a slight tilt, and he nodded, adjusting it. That adjustment, barely visible, carried all his care. "I built for us." They didn't speak much during the construction. Nash's silence spoke volumes, each nail pounded in with intention, each board placed with thought. When the frame rose, he left a rough sketch, a small desk, by the window room for a cradle sunlight in the morning. Clara found the pencil lines between beams, proof he thought of a future before she even knew. One dusty July dawn, Clara felt it before she saw it. A gentle rolling ache beneath her ribs, a flutter of new life. She stepped outside and paused, looking at the homestead barn's house, the new room's silhouette. Nash appeared from the barn, saw her standing still, and tipped his head, noticing her look. When Clara touched her belly lightly, his calloused hand swept over hers. He didn't say anything, just smiled. And that quiet smile was everything: relief, hope, love, stitched between them. That morning, Nash brought coffee and a cloth for her brow. He adjusted her chair so the sun hit just right. Throughout the growing days, he carried heavy buckets of water, shaved bark for a cradle, and painted the new room's wooden slats white. He bought lace curtains from town, without being asked, tucked them in the drawer when Clara slept, and in the evenings he hovered near her side, with a hand always on her back. In late winter's thaw, they welcomed Lily, named for the first wildflowers blooming near the creek. Clara held her newborn skin soft and pink, while Nash knelt nearby humming an old tune. He didn't cry, but his eyes caught the lamplight with a soft sheen. When Lily issued her first wail, Clara brushed a lock across her forehead, and Nash rested a hand on her shoulder. That hand trembled only slightly, enough to show he felt everything. They made their home small but tender. Lily slept in the rocking cradle. Nash carved simple wooden spindles, sanding each to smooth perfection. Clara mended scraps of cloth into baby blankets. When Lily fussed in the night, Nash rose to hold her, swaying gently until she drifted back to sleep. Evening routines: Nash would light the lantern, stir a pot of stew, then lean on the doorway as they ate. His eyes always found Clara's first, then lingered on Lily. He never spoke big words, he didn't need to. But his presence was constant, attentive, unwavering, an unspoken promise kept. On their daughter's first birthday, Clara bought a small heap of morning glories to plant by the new room's window. Nash helped dig alongside her, earth warm and receptive under their hands. Their fingers brushed, and both paws smiled soft. And knowing they built more than wood and plaster, they built a life. That night, with Lily asleep and the fire embers glowing golden, Clara drifted to Nash's side. She slipped her arm around his, letting her head rest on his shoulder. He didn't move, but his thumb grazed her arm. "I never asked you to stay," Clara whispered, voice barely louder than the drifting embers. "And you didn't have to give me a promise. You built me one by staying." Nash's breath warmed her temple. His hand smoothed back damp strands of her hair. He didn't need to whisper back. His quiet devotion was in the warmth under her cheek. One evening, as wind stirred dust on the path, Clara and Nash stood outside, Lily cradled in Clara's arms. Lights glowed through the new room's window, bright as any town celebration. A small table and 2 chairs sat by the hearth, Lily's cradle nearby, blankets neatly folded. "Look," Nash said softly. Clara watched him, watch their home fingers tracing the plan he had drawn months ago while real. He rested his hand on Lily's swaddled back, and she stirred, cooed. Nash's thumb brushed the baby's cheek. Clara felt the pulse of life, of legacy. Nash stepped forward, brushed Clara's temple with the back of his fingers, wiping a gray lock behind her ear. She looked up at him, tired eyes shining. He paused, hand hanging there, then leaned in close enough that his lips brushed her forehead. Quietly he said, "You're not just needed, you're home." Clara closed her eyes, pressing back into his palm. Lily cooed again, small against her breast. Time stood still as the dust settled on the land they had made together, 2 people, Not by blood, but by trust. Families built by presence, not promise. Love spoken in everyday actions, not ceremony. Supplementary story. The man who stayed. I grew up as a shadow, the illegitimate son of a man who never once called me his own. My mother, a dark-skinned woman of native Mexican blood, taught me how to survive without being seen. The name Nash was hers. No one ever gave me a last name. I don't blame Jed. He never did me wrong. But everything good land home, even a promise to a faraway girl, carried his name. I was always outside the frame, the one mending fences, patching roofs, hauling feed, but never written into the story until she came. I'm not the kind of man who usually does favors for others, but when Jed wrote almost begging, I read those 3 lines over and over through the night. There's a girl on her way to Dust Haven. She thinks I'll be there. I can't. But I can't leave her alone either. Jed. I didn't know a thing about her. Clara Winslow. Short, neat name. Never met her. Never heard of her. Not my business. But I owed Jed more than I like to admit, even things I shouldn't. And if she truly came here with hope, someone ought to be there to carry the truth. So I saddled up, didn't rush, brought a clean blanket, a piece of cornbread, and the intention to say, "You'll know I'm not Jed." I got to the station later than planned. The rain from the night before had left the road slick, almost split a wheel. When I pulled the horse to a stop, I saw her sitting there, in a dark dress, by the depot wall. I knew it was her. Didn't need to be told. She didn't look up, hands folded on a travel bag, hair combed tight, eyes locked on the tracks, not searching but waiting. Waiting for something she was already starting to doubt would come. I stood there for a while, unsure what to say first. Nothing in what I owed Jed required me to bring her home. I could have told her the truth and walked away, but I couldn't. Not after seeing how she clutched that bag strap, like letting go might unravel her whole being. I don't believe in love at first sight, but there are moments unasked for, undeniable, that come and stay. And when they do, you know. I don't think much about love. It's not something you can hammer, fix, or tie down. But I believe in work, in folding blankets before sunrise, and leaving hot coffee where someone will find it, and hearing a cough from the shed, and setting out warm water without needing to ask. I never knew how to be needed, but I know how not to leave someone behind. And her Clara, little by little, she gave me that chance. She never asked for help, never cried in front of me. But I saw it all, saw her cough into her sleeve and smile like nothing was wrong. Saw her pick up a torn sleeve and stitch it with trembling hands. Saw her at the fence line wind, pulling her hair, looking into the distance, where no one ever came back. I remember the first time she laughed. It was just a story I told about a weasel that outsmarted me 3 nights in a row, leaving tracks in the wrong direction. She laughed loud and clear, no holding back. It caught me still mid-motion. Her smile didn't fade quick, and her eyes glinted like something let loose for the first time in years. That moment I didn't have a name for it. Only knew I'd do anything to hear her laugh like that again. When Jed returned, I meant to leave. I didn't tell anyone, but I packed the saddle, folded the blanket, wrapped the old knife my father left behind. I'm not a man for contests. If she chose him, I'd accept it. But Clara placed her hand on mine, just as I turned away, and said, "One thing, I came here for a promise, but I stayed because of you." I couldn't breathe. No one had ever said something like that to me. No one had ever stayed for me. A year later, I still don't say much. But I carved the crib for our daughter, built the new room before she ever asked. I wake before dawn, light the fire, brew coffee, cut the cornbread. Every act is a word I don't know how to say. I'm not good with language. But I've learned this. Some people love with words. Me, I love by staying.